Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fighter Heart podcast. I'm here with Manny Garcia. Thank you for taking the time, Manny.
No problem. I'm happy to be here. My name's Manny Garcia. I'm born and raised in Miami, Florida. So, I've been a South Florida native my whole life. So, I'm currently 30, turning 31 pretty soon. But back in 2019, when I was 26 years old, I was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And it happened like pretty quickly. It was like when I first started feeling symptoms, it was about like the onset of symptoms, it was about 6 to 8 weeks before I was like diagnosed. And I was on a trip. I was in Germany at the time, like doing like a work thing and stuff. And then I started feeling like a sharp stabbing pain in like the upper part of my abdomen. And it was like from one night to the next while I was on this trip, and I started getting like a little nauseous on this trip. And it was like this sharp stabbing pain that would come and go that seemed like unprompted. And at the time, I'm just like, oh, it's my first time in Europe, and maybe it's the beer costs less than water, it's the schnitzel I ate last night, or something like that. And then so when I'm feeling a little bit worse as like the trip like goes on and stuff, but I wasn't like too alarmed. Then I get back, I see an urgent care. They basically tell me like take a laxative, and if you're still having issues, like see a specialist. So the next day I make an appointment with a gastro. And then it was a series of appointments with the gastro because it's whatchamacallit. Like it wasn't immediately that like I started feeling so terrible, but it was like week by week. It's like the symptoms started like becoming more prevalent. Like the sharp stabbing pains happening more often. I'm throwing up more often. And it's like it took a few weeks, but at some point I started kind of like being like, okay, I can't eat this anymore because I can't keep this down. I can't eat this anymore and I can't because I can't keep this down. And then with every appointment that I would see with the gastro, they started with a physical examination, say like, hey, you have gastritis. Here's some medication for like your stomach lining or like little things like that. And then like they would schedule my next appointment like 6 to 8 weeks out. And then a week or two would go by. And then the first time that I saw him, it was about 2 weeks that went by. And I called him back and I'm like, look, I'm feeling worse, all this stuff. Like, I'm coming in. I don't care if I have an appointment or not, like having to be like that insistent about like my care and stuff. Or I mean, that's like how it goes with like doctor's offices sometimes. But they scheduled me for a couple different procedures and stuff. They ended up doing like an endoscopy, can't really find anything. At this point, I went on this trip in February in 2019. We're going through like March and it's like, starting to get like a little bit worse. At this point, I'm starting to lose weight because I'm throwing up so often. I'm eating less. I got to a point where I was like kind of like, okay, I'm eating less than like 1,000 calories a day. Like a few more weeks went by and it's like, oh shoot, I'm running on like 500 calories a day. I'm hungry all the time. This pain is coming like more often. It's happening like pretty quick, but it wasn't necessarily overnight, but it was fast as far as I guess like cancer goes. So it isn't until they do an ultrasound that I get the results back. I'm sitting in the office with my mom, and they say that yeah, your liver is twice its normal size, and we can't see your gallbladder. Like that's what's like causing you. And like while I was losing all this weight, I was getting like bloating, like in like my abdomen, I guess. And then like they're explaining this to me, and they're like, yeah, and you're starting to get jaundice. And I was like, really? Like I didn't even like notice. They had to bring like a mirror over, and I kind of like turned my eye and looked to the side, and like even my mom was shocked because like I honestly didn't notice that either. And
What is jaundice? I'm not
so
sure.
jaundice is it's basically like when like something's wrong with your liver and it's not like filtering like your blood properly. I don't know like the full medical term, but like the effect is that you have a problem with your liver and the whites of your eyes start turning yellow. And when it gets really bad, like you start turning yellow in general. Like your skin
Oh,
starts turning yellow, like all this stuff. So it's usually like some kind of like something's wrong with your liver. Like you have like a liver problem. It's more common to hear about jaundice with like, people with hepatitis or maybe like severe alcoholics or like things like that. But yeah, they're explaining this to me, and they basically say like you need to get a CAT scan. And then the doctor like kind of stopped and said, let me rephrase that. You need to go to the hospital and get a CAT scan. Like don't like call and like schedule an outpatient one. That was one of like the first time where it's like there's urgency here. Like this isn't just like, hey, we're calling and making appointments and trying to like, figure out what's wrong. It's like go like today. And at this point, like I was pretty much like in agony, like most days. And it's like the pain that I was feeling, like the sharp stabbing pain, was just constant, like all the time. It was like constant.
was it like heartburn? How that feels?
Not really. I guess it's a type of organ pain. It's difficult to describe, but it wasn't like a cramp. It was like a sharp. It was like there was like a knife like inside like my liver, just like poking at things. But it wasn't like it wasn't something that would be caught on by like mobility or something that I ate. It would just kind of like come and go. And really what the pain was is that as my liver was expanding, as I would take like breaths or like my lungs or like everything in your body's like touching up against it or like moving, that's what's causing it. So it's not even so much like you moving, it's just like your body like operating like normally. And it's like things are like, it was it was inflamed and like all this stuff. So I get to the hospital, they do the scan, and then at this point it's April. It's April. So yeah, it's been about 6 to 8 weeks. I've been like in and out of these appointments. And then they tell me that like as soon as I get to the hospital, I get admitted. They tell me like, hey, you have blood in your urine, like, all this stuff. Like they saw how much pain I was in. They immediately put me on morphine. And I was like, is that necessary? Like, I thought you guys were gonna give me a big Tylenol or I don't know. Like I thought there's like levels to this, and they're just like bang, like right to like the opioids. I'm just like, oh shoot. And they're talking about like admitting me and they have to do a biopsy and do certain tests. So they do the biopsy, and then and it's funny. It's like on of all days, it's Good Friday of all days that I get the news that it's cancer. And the way the doctor explained it is that she had a roundabout, like kind of like wordy way of explaining it, but my family's like all in the hospital room, like with me, my parents, a couple cousins, aunts and uncle, packed into like this little like hospital room. And the doctor has this wordy way of saying that, yes, we took the cells from your biopsy. We looked at it at a slide under a microscope and blah, explaining like what they did. And they're like, yeah, and the cells are cancerous. And then she just kind of looks at me. And I'm there like laying in bed, like just kind of like taking it in. Like, and then my first thought in that moment, honestly, was like a sense of like relief because
I
it's
know
like
what it is.
exactly, 100%. It's like this isn't unknown anymore because that to me was scarier. Having a doctor come back in and be like all shoulders, like we don't know, like all this stuff. So it's like, okay, kind of sitting there for a moment. And then I look back at the doctor, I'm like, all right, well, what kind of cancer is it? Is it lymphoma? You found it in my liver? Like that's like the words like I heard some other doctors using the last like couple days. And they said, no, it's not. We know it's not lymphoma. We know that it's spread to your liver and we have to find out, we have to run some more tests to find where it started so we can come up with a treatment plan because we need to know what kind of cancer it is before we can treat it. And then it's like, yeah, at this point it's almost like a speed run of like, oh shoot, they're throwing all these like cancer terms at me and stuff, or even just learning that like chemo is more than just one thing, that it's a whole umbrella of all these like complicated like drugs and treatments, or that different cancers require different kinds of chemos, and it's like it gets that specific and like complicated. So it's like, all right. So they had to run some more tests, and then 3 days later, again, some like funny irony there, on Easter Sunday, I find out that it's pancreatic cancer. So it's not just like stage 4. And like, what I did ask the doctor is that I said, "What stage is it? Can you tell me that?" Because like I don't hardly know anything about cancer. And she said, like, no, it's stage 4. It's metastasized and spread to your liver. It's probably in other parts of your body. Like, we need to run some more tests and like figure it out. It's like, okay. I was at a hospital in Miami called Mercy Hospital. Then we went to the University of Miami because they have this place called the Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center. They're basically like the best cancer hospital like in town, one of the top ones like in the state and in the country and like all this stuff. So, hey, they're in town. Let's go there. And they end up putting me in like a temporary room on the 6th floor there. And basically, it's like with a lot of cases with cancer, like there's cases like Michael Reed, for instance, where it's like he had like a very rare type of cancer and a long list of like complications with it and stuff, which is like super hard and like very challenging. With pancreatic cancer, it's what the complication with it is that it's just so aggressive and deadly that it's normally a death sentence. And so I've talked to other like people that have been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, like stage 4 cancers in general. And sometimes, often, or not oftentimes, but sometimes it's like the conversations like we have this many months left. Like they start talking about time left and like all these things. But I was basically like so like at like the end of my rope that they weren't talking about months or weeks. It's like kind of like you can't, it's basically like all these different teams of doctors explaining that it's like, hey, like you came in here, you're basically like you're dying. Like the way they explained it to me was that it's like your liver would be the first thing to shut down, and that your liver enzymes and your blood work so in the red that we can't tell you, hey, you have a week left. Hey, you have exactly this much time left. It's just at the point where it's like it's kind of like driving your car without getting like an oil change. There's no set number where it's just gonna die on you. At some point, it's just gonna stop, and then once that happens, then you'll be in hospice and stuff. And then they're trying to figure out these things to like, get my blood work to like level off because it was so aggressive and like so strong that it's like I wasn't eligible for surgery. I couldn't get. So basically, what they found was that I had a mass in my pancreas the size of an avocado seed or like a golf ball, and then it spread to my liver where there was more tumors than they could count, and that's what was causing my liver to like expand and all that. I had some tumors in my lymph nodes, and then like that's how they found me. It was like a big mess. And so I couldn't get surgery. I couldn't get like, all these things. And even chemo, I was like ineligible for because it reaches a point for cancer patients that you're so weak and you're so frail, just giving you the chemo could kill you. So when you're at that point, it's like, oh, the doctor has to go through like special like authorizations with the hospital or like whatever it is and like all this stuff. It it ends up being like the conversation so grim that I'm on the sixth floor and they can't decide whether to put me on the 11th floor, which is the chemo floor for treatment, or the 13th floor, which is hospice. Like I'm just kind of getting like passed around all the stuff and teams. And at this point, I've been in the hospital for about a couple weeks after that. It's like, like getting towards like the end of April. And
Mhm.
then eventually it was through a work contact that it was like a builder that I'd done like work with, or like, somebody that I knew from work that knew somebody that knew the head clinical researcher, Dr. Peter Hussein, who works at Sylvester. And he's like the head guy for like my kind of cancer. He's like one of those guys that like studies that. And so I remember the day that I met him and like the whole like this guy found out about me, like he like looks into like my chart and like my thing. He's like, well, you know what? This looks very bad. Looks very grim, but he's very young. He's 26, all this stuff. Let me go meet the guy. And I remember the whole hospital was like a buzz with like the floor, like the nurses, the orderlies, like all these people are like, "Ooh, Dr. Hussein's coming here, talk to a patient." I'm like, "Oh, this guy must be like a big deal." And he is, and he was, and he's awesome. But he basically just laid it down for me. He's like, "Look, it's like we can do nothing and hope for a miracle, which we kind of know is like not going to happen, or we can give you the chemo and hope that it doesn't kill you and hope that the cancer responds to it because there's still the possibility that it just might not. And the best that we can do is dilute it down to 25% strength. And this guy has like basically has like enough like influence and authority at like the hospital that it's like they follow my lead. Like they'll do whatever like I say to do and stuff. So we did that. The chemos would immediately save my life. After like my first like round of chemo, they gave it to me like 3 days like back to back. They watched me for like a couple of days after that, and then I'm out of the hospital, like walking out in fresh air, like
3 days?
yeah, like it was 3 days. So it was 3 days of straight chemo, and then like another 2 or 3 days of just observation, just to make sure like I didn't have some adverse reaction to like the therapy and stuff. But even for my first chemo infusion, they would do my blood work like every 6 hours. To like I remember it's like every day they come in at like 4 in the morning and then come in at 10 o'clock, and like like clockwork. It's like because they're always like the situation's constantly changing, and it was already from the first infusion. It's like no, the cancer's responding. Oh my gosh, like the things are like coming down and all this stuff. So I immediately I'm out of the hospital. And then as I'm doing more chemo, they find like the cancer's like, receding, all this stuff. I get a tumor pop up in my spine, like just kind of randomly, like as like the rest of the cancer is dying, another one popped up in my spine. And then I got two brain tumors, one in my frontal lobe and one in my parietal lobe, which is just so bananas to me because it's like, oh, it's like this is just traveling through your bloodstream and can just like attach like anywhere or like all this stuff. Like in my mind, it's like, yeah, it's like this like growth, this weed that's like stretching out from itself. And that's normally how it goes. But again, every cancer is different. They all have different characteristics, ways of spread, like aggressiveness, like all these different things. And so basically it was a combination of chemo and radiation is what like immediately like, saved me. And then my doctor, he does a lot of treatment with this new therapy called immunotherapy. So it's a new kind of cancer treatment, similar to chemo, but with a lot less symptoms and side effects, way more manageable. And instead of like being a poison to your body, kind of like napalm, it gives your white blood cells certain proteins and like genetic information to make the tumors think that your immune system's friendly. Uses your own immune system to fight the disease. That might be oversimplifying it, but again, I'm just a patient, just a guy. But yeah, so I had one recurrence in my spine about like, well, basically, yeah. So I'm on this treatment and it's like it was on New Year's Eve of 2019 that I got the call from Dr. saying that he's like, we got your first clean scan. Like you're all good. Like all this stuff, which was like, oh, yippee, cool. And then I still had like my whole treatment thing for like the whole like plan of treatment's like 2 years. So as I'm like getting
How did the chemo affect you, by the way, before we go further? Like,
the
did
chemo, it was difficult to peg, man, because it's an interesting question because it's like I did end up getting chemo again with a recurrence, so I was able to figure out like exactly what it did. Because at the time when I got the chemo, it was like I was quite literally like on death's door, like feeling terrible, like pumped up with like Dilaudid. I had a fentanyl patch. They gave me a nerve block just like for the pain. It was like it's
um,
like I'm dying. It's like I'm always uncomfortable, bedridden, like all this stuff. When I was in the hospital, I looked like a mix between like a pregnant Simpson on Castaway. My beard was growing out. My like I looked all disheveled. My skin was turning yellow, and I'm like I have like this big belly, but I'm still like so thin and stuff. But basically it's
but so you were feeling better. The chemo didn't make you feel worse.
exactly it was hard to peg. It's like what do I feel sick now because of the disease or is it because of the chemo? And so whatchamacallit. So basically I had a recurrence about after like I think it was like 2.5 years after like my first thing. Like I was still like on like the immunotherapy like cycle of like being on it for 2 years. And then I had a recurrence in my spine again, but in a different part. And they zapped it with radiation again, put me on chemo again, switched my immunotherapy to a different like, cocktail of like, whatever it is. And then yeah, and then that now at this point, I've been off of treatment for at least a year and in complete remission. And it's pretty crazy. It's like wild stuff. I mean, like to come back from like stage 4 cancer in general, but it is like one of those things that it's like even for like pancreatic cancer, it's like I have to go like out of my way just to find like other like pancreatic cancer patients. And even like I've been like I work with like organizations that like the Sina Magwitz Foundation, they're specific to pancreatic cancer. There's like a couple other ones, but it's kind of hard to find, and it's unusual to find somebody that's like as young as I was that was diagnosed with like with and that's with cancer in general because it's like normally seen as like an old person's disease or at least like a middle-aged disease like all this stuff or unless like you're talking about like childhood leukemia and all this stuff. But anywho, but at the time, I had this naive optimism. I had this naive optimism that I just had this confidence that like, well, I'm gonna beat this. Because at the time, I just saw it as it's stage 4 cancer. It's, obviously it's like not good, but it's like I'm at the right place with the right people. I got my family around. It's like, I feel strong. I felt good. I didn't bother to Google about pancreatic cancer, which was wise and stuff. And like, I don't know how much the statistics have changed in 5 years. It's changed a little bit, but at the time when I was diagnosed, it's like, yeah, you look on Google, it's like the first year of diagnosis, 80% of patients die. Stage 1 through 4, it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter. Making it to 5 years, which is like where I'm at now, it's 95% mortality rate. And then 10 years, it's 99. So pancreatic cancer, it's normally a conversation of how heavy can we be with the treatments where before the cancer starts resisting it or changing it or like all this stuff. I'm just like in like this rare case of like kind of like I was with the right doctor that had like this new treatment that worked for my kind of tumor and my kind of cancer and this whole thing. So afterwards, like as I was getting better, like I found that out. I'm like, oh my God. Like no wonder everyone saw like would looked at me and like spoke to me like dead man walking. Like with and like with this hopelessness. And at the time I'd be like, yeah, no, my family, like obviously everyone's like freaking out and like all this stuff, like family, friends, even like the doctors have like you get to see like the different ways that like doctors and like caregivers and nurses like have to like tiptoe around like these delicate conversations like when you're asking questions about this stuff. And at the time I was like, I mean, I wasn't like happy as a lark the whole time, but it's like you could ask my friends and family, and it's like I had unbelievable spirit. Like basically kind of how you see me now. Just like kind of like joking and stuff, or like at one point I remember like they were still deciding like they couldn't like figure out like where to put me on the chemo floor, the hospice floor. And the doctor like says to me like, yeah, so we're still figuring it out, like all this stuff. The oncologist wouldn't even come see me. They would send like the general doctor, the general physician doctor to come explain it to me because they didn't want to come see me and explain that news to me
Mm.
and stuff. And so and I remember I asked her, I said, all right, well, either way, it's like I'm gonna end up like moving rooms. I said, whatever room I go to or whatever floor I go to, well, I have to actually like get up out of bed and like walk to the elevator and like do the whole thing. Because at this point, I'm basically like bedridden. Like they're telling me like, man, like Mr. Garcia, you need to take at least 2 or 3 laps a day, like up and down the hall so you don't get blood clots. I'm like, but it hurts. And you guys look at me funny when I do my walk after I get dilaudid because it just hurts so damn much. But it's like, oh, you're fall risk and all this stuff. And so I'm like, like, will I have to get up and go to the next room? And they're like, no, no, your bed has wheels. We'll be able to like wheel you in there. And then when she says that to me, it occurs to you, I'm like, wait a minute. So you're telling me if I do end up going to the 13th floor into hospice, this bed that I'm in right here, right now, this is my deathbed. She was like holding a clipboard and very grimly, she just kind of nods her head. And I'm there, I'm like, you guys will figure it out. Could I get you think I can get some mac and cheese like from the cafeteria? And they're like, no, you're on you have a procedure later, you're on NPO, like all that stuff. I'm like, I know the cafeteria told me that. I thought you could help me out. Like, okay, you'll figure it out. And she was like, oh, okay. And she looked like visibly shaken, just like walking out the room, like, oh, this dude's insane. Like he's lost his. And so, but yeah, man, it's like when people meet me and like they find out about like my story or like I talk about it and stuff, I often get a response for people that's like, oh, I'm so sorry, or I can't believe that happened to you. And I'm like, number one, don't be sorry, because it's not your fault. And then like I'll kind of be like, was it your fault? Did you give me cancer? And they're like, oh, no, no. Like, all right. Number one, it wasn't your fault. And number two, I can say with honesty and like brevity that it's like it was the best thing that ever happened to me in my life. To me personally, not just me personally, but like my friends and my family. And like, it's it's like Hallmark card sounding stuff, but it's like, yeah, it's like it brought my family together closer in a way that like I never like imagined and stuff. Like I had like aunts and uncles that were like estranged from like my own parents because of like like business relations that fell out like during the Great Recession, like, back in like '08. And it's like when I'm like, in this situation, it's like like the whole family's kind of like, what the fuck are we even mad about again? He's like, oh my God, like this
Yeah.
is so stupid. And it's like all that stuff is just water under the bridge. It's like this is like what really matters, or even like stuff that it's like yeah, it's like you can like count your blessings and like talk about how it's like, oh, I'm thankful for the things that I have, like to have a roof over my head, to have a computer in front of me, to have air conditioning and working plumbing. But it's like, dude, we're so fortunate to just be able to breathe without it hurting, to eat food and then take a shit later, and that our body's working the way that it's supposed to and stuff. When those things start falling away from you piece by piece, you're just kind of like, holy shit, this can get a whole lot worse, like real quick. Like
Yeah.
all and it really it like in a obviously in a very visceral way, like showed me that. And like just like so many things that it's like even like, I'll never stop like looking for that experience and like into like my everyday life and like learning from it, having gratitude and like appreciation for it and stuff. And like there's even a point where it's like, obviously it's like as I started getting better, like I started getting back into like my old like my old passions and stuff. Like oftentimes like I'll talk with cancer survivors and like normally the thought process is, okay, I have this disease. What can I do with the time I have left? But for me, I was thinking, I'm like, what am I gonna do when I get out of here? Like, what am I gonna do when I get better and stuff? And I started thinking about like, oh, like I was a skydiver in college, but I never really like chased it like fully and stuff. I'm like, I'm gonna get back into skydiving and like base jumping. I'm like, why did I even like stop doing that? I stopped doing that because I was saving up to buy a house and like be an adult, and kind of you get wrapped up in like,
Yeah.
the stuff of like which isn't, are important things to do, or like these goals that like we put up. But I remember being in the hospital thinking it's like, man, what feels better? A number with a certain with a comma in like my savings account or whatever, or experience and like things and like memories and like like all these different things. So it was such a huge positive like life-changing like thing for me, and like in a way like kind of, how do I put this? It's like I guess like put me more in line with like what like my purpose is, or like kind of like help like give me like direction, because it's like kind of like, and you could just kind of like go through the motions and still lead like a pretty like happy and fulfilling life. But it's like, but it could, it's like, yeah, it's so true. We are not promised tomorrow, and it's like just to wake up and get out of bed like with our own agency is like, you know,
Put things into perspective.
under such an underrated thing. Absolutely, yeah.
Very cool. Do they ever, I obviously they'll never know, but like do they know if it's like hereditary or how you could have developed this?
So I did genetic testing, and with the geneticist that I had a couple other members of my family that had done genetic testing in the past, so they're able to like cross-reference like, oh, with your cousin's testing with this, and like they explain to you the science of it. And what they told me was that yes, like we're expecting to find a certain mutation in your DNA, and this mutation leads to a syndrome that we know of that it doesn't make you get the cancer, it just makes you more likely to get it. And it's like, okay, so they do genetic testing, like all this stuff, and I go back to the geneticist and they say, so we didn't find it. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay, so what does that mean exactly? So it's not in my genes. And they say like like as far as we know, based on the science that we have now, it doesn't seem to be in your genes. Like we can't point to that and say like, yes, it's there, like all this stuff. So the doctor said there's a good chance that this isn't something you'll pass on to like children or anything like that. I'm like, okay, so it was environmental. It was something in the water. I ate too much, too much sugary cereal as a kid or all this stuff. And they're just like, we don't know that either. Like basically the doctor said is that your kind of cancer is still like, it's not even so much that it's like, oh, it's a rare kind of cancer, not as much people get it. But he straight up said to me, we don't understand enough about your disease to know where it came from. We're still trying to figure that out. Like that was a situation where the doctors were literally
Yeah.
sorry, man. Like we're trying to figure it out, and we still don't know yet, which was crazy to me because it's like kind of like, man, it's like cancer is like so much. It's so much more complicated than like people like realize and stuff, or even when it goes into things like supporting like cancer research and different things, or it's like which are all like great things and stuff. Or it's like people are like, yeah, I'm doing this thing to raise money for breast cancer, or this money for like this kind of cancer or that, and it's like cool, but it's like who actually gets that money and like all that
And where does
stuff.
it go to? Yeah.
And it usually goes to some like basically it's like institutions like the one that I went to like that are like national cancer institutions or different places that it's like where like that building is where the people work that like actually are writing a book on how to treat this stuff and like try to like figure it out. But it is like one of those things that it's like kind of like it's like yeah it's like obviously it's like having cancer it's like you learn like so much from it. But it's like yeah it's like so many lessons and it was like such a hugely positive thing and then now I'm actually on. I gotta bust it out now. I gotta show you freaking my skydiving rig. I go parachuting with this thing. I go parachuting with this thing, and then now I gotta show you. I gotta show you my wingsuit.
Wait, there's actually a parachute in there?
Yeah, yeah. I go parachuting with that. I'm a base jumper too. I jump off of buildings in downtown Miami sometimes. This is my wingsuit that I do like the whole like squirrel thing. It's kind of like carry out.
What? You jump off the buildings like the and do the like the chipmunk thing? Like
Not with the squirrel suit, with the squirrel with the base jumping, that's just like with its own parachute and stuff. But yeah, I'm building on my base jumping experience so I can combine the two and stuff. But yeah, I was on a trip in Europe like back in October. I was jumping in Croatia and Italy and Switzerland and like yeah, like all these things that it's like, oh, like these were like this is all stuff that I wanted that I wanted to get into when I was like 17, 18. I first like learned about it, like watching it like on YouTube and stuff. And then it's like I started going down the path and then I just kind of like left it pending and
yeah.
all this stuff. And now it's like, as we're having this whole experience, it's like kind of like, I'm only getting older. I only got so much time, like, to do this stuff. And it's like, especially now that it's like, I haven't like settled down yet. I still don't have kids yet. It's like, yo, like, get it, dude. Like, get it, like, while you can. Cause it's like, you have the time and the agency. And it's like, why just have it be like a thing in your head that like you think about, like, as like your shower thoughts, your car thoughts, like all this stuff. It's like your dreams. It's like, do something about
When
it.
else are you gonna do them? Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So it's been a hugely positive thing, and then it's like, but like apart from like for me personally, like my own goals and like all this stuff, it's like it's just done immense things for my family. That's the biggest thing. Has made us like stronger as a unit and stuff, and just how important it is to like to spend time with like your loved ones and really like how you love them and how you show that love and like all these different things. And it's like, and when it comes down to it, it's like there's just so many things that like we focus on in life sometimes. And it happens to me sometimes because it's like I'm just a person. I have to remind myself sometimes, but it's like we get caught up on the minutia of life, the small, uncomplicated details that often become trivial. It's like seeing a beautiful woman walk down the sidewalk, and then your buddy's talking about what kind of shoelaces she has on, and it's like that is not that's there, cool, but that's not the whatever. That's not the focus, or like that's not the meat of it, But all this stuff, but yeah, that's basically like my story in a nutshell, and it's like, and yeah, it's just been like one of the biggest, coolest, biggest positive things for me in my life, and like that it's done a lot for me.
Awesome, man. I mean, I love hearing how the great perspective you have on it and the outlook. I mean, and congrats, you're out of remission for how long? A year?
At least like a year and a half, something like that. Like I don't know. I don't I start my for me, and I tell other cancer patients and survivors this too, that some people want to start the clock on like when they reach like remission and stuff, and I tell people like don't do that because it's soul crushing if you get a recurrence. Like it
Mm,
pops up again, then it's like a restart of the timer. I tell people because like some cancer patients that I talk to that are still going through treatment, they don't identify themselves as a survivor. And I remember like I was talking to like some people in a cancer support group one time because I'm pretty like involved with like some different ones with like American Cancer Society and these people called CINA, or at UM they have this thing called the AYA program for like young adults and stuff. And I remember I told this guy one time, I'm like, look, like you might still be a patient, you might still be doing treatment, but you're a survivor the moment you find out you get diagnosed. That's when like your survivor like timer starts and
mm,
stuff. Even remission is like a relative term because remission just means that it means different things. It means that the cancer's, if you watch Breaking Bad, they'll say like, yes, it means the cancer's shrinking. You're in a type of remission. Or yeah, we did a scan and we don't see it. But it's like, well, scientifically, it could still be in your blood on a microscopic level that a scan pack can't pick up, that we haven't figured out a way to do blood tests for that yet. So it's like it's a dicey thing. So I tell people it's like you're a survivor the moment that you find out that you're diagnosed and stuff. And that's like a victory. That's a
yeah.
victory. Like, say like, hey, I was diagnosed 1, 2, 5, 10, 25 years ago, whatever it is, like all this stuff. Like that's when it starts for people and stuff. But it's
That's
like
a great outlook. I mean, that ties into my next question, actually. I'm sure this is what your advice would be. What would your advice be to someone who found themselves in a similar position you were in 2019?
the biggest thing that I tell people time and again is I mean it's like the two big things. You need the clinical side, which obviously means like get with a doctor, like get with like a good team of like people and stuff. Especially if you have a rare kind of cancer, it's like it is difficult. Like I mean, I was lucky that the doctor, the guy is in my freaking backyard and stuff. I don't know what the case would have been if I lived in like, Arkansas or Nebraska or North Dakota or just somewhere else where that like it's like, shoot. Or I know other patients that it's like, yeah, they live like in like Boca Raton or they live in like Fort Myers, Florida, and they got to drive like 2 or 3 hours just to go to their infusion appointments or like all this stuff. So the number one thing is like, get to like a hospital, a doctor, a place, an organization that has success with treating your kind of cancer. That's number one. That's hard to do though by yourself as a cancer patient because it's, it's such a like a mind melt thing. It's like it's a lot to deal with. It's a lot to deal with for the average cancer patient. The second thing that I'll say that it's like really like truly important that's super underrated is having a solid support system. Having a solid support system. Like in cancer support circles, we call them caregivers, which is basically like it's at least like a part-time job like in of itself where it's like, you're helping like take care of somebody that has cancer, be it like, emotionally, physically, spiritually, or like kind of like, just being with a pat them on the back when they're like, I hurt and I'm throwing up all the time and this sucks, like all this, and it's like, like be there with them and
Yeah.
like to help like kind of like, suffer with them and like help them like get like through it and stuff. Because like where I see that like and again I'm not like a scientist or like a doctor. Absolutely, I like for sure that your attitude and like your mental state of mind has like some kind of marketable effect on the outcome that you're looking for when it comes to disease, specifically with like disease. That I can't say like how much that matters or how much that is, but having a support system and like a caregiver or a group of caregivers or people that are helping you like manage that stuff is like so huge. I don't know what I would have done without my parents like being those caregivers for me, helping me like, navigate like all the different doctors that I'm talking to and appointments and like helping set my schedule or even like remind like my dad printing out like an Excel spreadsheet of like a table of like these are all the different meds that you have to take and we're gonna check off like which times you took these and that and the other and it's like just like all that kind of stuff. So those are the two big things. Find a good hospital and find a good group of people that can help you through this disease. And oftentimes getting connected to some kind of cancer support group does huge things too because it's one thing that it's like I could sit here and for all day for 10 hours could talk about the experience of it, how it felt, how it made me feel, the things that I was thinking about, where your mind goes to looking out the window, overviewing like the city of Miami, like in a hospital room, all this stuff. But there's a special kinship that happens when, like, when it's like, hey, like you're sitting in my seat now. You know what it is. Like, I don't have to explain to you like how much of like a nuisance it is when it's like, oh, the chemo nurse can't find my port. Or like funny, like little like stupid things like up at the hospital that it's complaining about, along with like the big, woes and trials and tribulations. Like, oh, like like my job is like I'm probably gonna get fired, or like, oh, like what am I gonna do about rent, or where am I gonna live, or groceries, or all these things. So finding like kinship with like a group of people is like, I think, pretty critical. Those are, so that's my advice. That's what I would say.
Hey, I think that's good advice, man.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, dude. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before I let you go?
I think I've said everything that I'd like to say, but thank you for having me on, Joe. It's I don't want to, like, I don't know how much of me is just like a narcissist, or that it's like I just love telling my story, or it seems to have an effect on people and stuff, like cancer patients and non. But yeah, man, thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
Awesome, man. Thanks again. Everyone else, thanks for listening to the Spider Heart podcast. We will see you again next time.